All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. It's great to see so many groups starting to join us live on YouTube for today's event. I can already see a lot of groups who have started talking to each other back and forth in the YouTube chat. So great to see so many with us for a nice early event here in Canada, at least. I want to give a shout out to everybody tuning in on YouTube. You can use the chat sidebar on the right. Let us know where you're watching from. And don't hesitate to send us in some questions. Great to be able to continue the learning. Normally we'll be broadcasting live into classrooms across North America and beyond. But for the foreseeable future, we've been having a blast broadcasting events live into the homes of parents, educators, and students everywhere. So we've got a really exciting event planned for today. Today we're meeting Dr. Winnie Courtene-Jones and Sally Earthrowl, members of eXXpedition team. eXXpedition runs pioneering all-female sailing research expeditions to investigate the causes and solutions to ocean plastic pollution. So the Round the World expedition covers over 38,000 nautical miles, enabling 300 women to go to sea as hands-on crew, participate in scientific research and solutions-based thinking. So Winnie is the science lead for the expedition. She's a marine scientist specializing in ocean plastic pollution and has researched this topic in a variety of environments, from the coast to some of the most remote parts of the deep sea. Sally is the mission lead for the expedition. She's a keen environmentalist, adventure, and geography teacher. And in 2018, she joined eXXpedition, sailing and carrying out scientific research into plastic pollution in the North Pacific Gyre. So before I let Sally and Winnie take over, I do want to share one more thing today. There are a lot of people joining us online today, so I've opened a Slido room. And basically, I'm going to share the link in the chat sidebar. The Slido room will let you send in some questions in advance, upvote other people's questions, so we get some of the best questions coming to the top. And the event code for the room is plastic. So I've just shared that in the chat, the Slido link, as well as the event code plastic. You can head in there and start sending in some questions in advance, and we'll pick some of those as well. All right, Sally and Winnie, it's so great to have you joining us live from the UK. We're excited to get to know you a little bit better, learn a little bit more about eXXpedition. And of course, we have a great group who's ready to ask some questions.
Hi, so I'm going to kick us off. I'm just about to share my screen, so hopefully you can all see that now.
Yeah, looks good.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's go. So yeah, thanks for the intro. I am Sally, and I am the mission leader for eXXpedition. And I've been with eXXpedition since 2018, when I sailed across the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And I would currently be out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, except obviously, like everyone else, I'm stuck at home. Although my outfit and my background suggest otherwise, I am staying at home along with the rest of the world. And I'm excited that Winnie gets to join us later as well. And she's going to talk about the science program that we run on board, so that we can find out more about the issue of plastic pollution, and leading to some of the solutions and actions that all of us can take to make a difference. So this picture I'm showing you on the screen is myself, Winnie, and Emily Penn, who's our director, on SV Travel Edge, our boat, and it's a very rare occurrence. All three of us won't be on this vessel again until it gets back to the UK. And the boat is currently in Tahiti. But I wanted to share it with you because I'm going to zoom Emily in via the power of video to tell you a little bit more about eXXpedition Round the World, our aims, and what we hope to achieve.
North of Sierra, south of Sierra. Cyclonic, becoming northwesterly 5 to 7. Deep sea, 4 to 7. Showers.
Every day I wake up, I choose love, I choose light. Every day I wake up, I choose love, I choose light. Every day I wake up, I choose love, I choose light. Every day I wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up.
We now know there are over 5 trillion fragments of plastic floating on the surface of our ocean. There are many times that have sunk to the depths, so deep in a place that we can't even measure them. trying to clean up these microplastics is the most enormous challenge, and the solutions start upstream on land. eXXpedition Round the World is an all-women sailing voyage studying plastic and toxic pollution. Over 2 years, 300 women will sail 38,000 nautical miles, exploring 4 of the 5 oceanic gyres and the Arctic. We have 3 main goals. One is to do solutions-focused science. We need to get out there and understand what type of plastic is in our ocean, and therefore where is it coming from, so that we can stop it on land. Secondly is about communications. We all know we have an issue of plastic in our ocean, but we need to move that narrative along to actually talk about what that problem is. The fact that it's microplastic and the fact that it's sinking means it's so hard to clean up. And thirdly, it's about building an army of inspired change makers. These 300 women who've been out there, seen the problem for themselves firsthand, understand what the solutions are and the role that they can play in solving it. What we realise is there's no silver bullet solution to solving the marine plastic issue, but we need to be working from every angle, from every sector, to solve the problem here on land.
A great intro there that gives you a bit of a flavour of what life's like on board, the science that we're doing, and the goals that we're trying to achieve. To give you a bit of what we've been up to so far, eXXpedition's been running for about 5 years, and before we started Round the World, we've actually run 11 voyages, and we set sail for Round the World, our circumnavigation, in October last year, and we set sail from Plymouth here, sailed across one of the gyres, the North Atlantic, through the Caribbean Sea and the Panama Canal, all the way over through the South Pacific Gyre to Tahiti, where our boat is going to hang out for a little while until it's able to set sail again. But it's not just Winnie, myself and Emily on board running these missions. We're actually taking 300 women with us around the world, so they can have their own adventure, they can experience the ocean firsthand, and they can learn more about this issue of ocean plastic, so that they can then take that story back into their own communities to really make a difference in whatever sphere of influence they might have. We have 10 women on board each voyage leg, and we split the whole circumnavigation into 30 legs. And I'm really lucky to be mission leader, because it means I'm on over half of those voyage legs for our entire circumnavigation. But I've not always been a teacher, and I've not always been a mission leader. I used to be a teacher, and I still am. Education still is very, very important to me. And before I joined eXXpedition, I actually lived in Bali in Indonesia, and it took me moving to the other side of the world to realise the extent of our plastic pollution problem. This is an image here of one of the waterways nearby where I lived, and you can see the extent of waste that's made its way into this, that goes straight out into the ocean. And I started to then ask a few questions. I'd grown up from a very privileged background where I had the bin truck come round and collect my waste. I had recycling facilities that I could go to and utilise, and I believed that I was managing my waste in a really effective way. But that step is missing in Indonesia. There isn't a robust, a really good waste recycling or recycling system. And so it means that you get rubbish and litter strewn across the streets and on the beaches, and in landfills that, you know, they don't have the funds to necessarily make them sanitary and make them safe. So you get a lot of that waste blowing off into the ocean as well. Now, every single nation has its own challenges when it comes to managing the environment. And, you know, it's not Indonesia's fault that it's in this situation. And it's actually started to question that it's not all of Indonesia's waste that's actually ending up in that particular country. A lot of our waste travels around the world to poorer, less developed countries where it can be put in dump sites, and often that ends up in the ocean. And you can see in that image, there's lots of things that we're familiar with: plastic bags, straws, things that lots of people use on an everyday basis. But it's a bit of a shame, really, because it's a mismatch between this plastic material, which is amazing and designed to last forever, and items that are designed to last for 10 or 15 minutes. Those single-use plastic items that end up being in our environment for a really long time. And in fact, every single piece of plastic item that's ever been produced is somewhere in some form still on our planet. Even if it's broken down into tiny pieces, the mass still exists somewhere. What about recycling though? Because I've always recycled as much as I could. But when you start to look into it, actually recycling isn't as amazing as we want it to be in the current system. Only about 9% of our world's waste, plastic, actually gets recycled. And even when it does, the polymers, the parts that the plastic is made out of, actually degrade in quality. So they're not worth as much in terms of monetary value as they were when they were the original item. And so we need to really start thinking about the system that we're using and what the issues are and how we can come up with solutions. And that's why I decided to join eXXpedition North Pacific. I found out that there's an estimated 5 trillion fragments of plastic in our oceans, which is extortionate. But it's not surprising when you think that if every piece of plastic item, every toothbrush I've ever used still exists on the planet somewhere. And so back in 2018, I joined the boat in Hawaii and I sailed across to Vancouver. And I was out at sea for 2.5 weeks without seeing any land. Now, I had done a little bit of sailing before, but I'm going to show you a video now that gives you an introduction into our first few days out at sea and a bit of more of an insight into what life's like on board.
In the last 48 hours, we've had wind, waves,
Rocking and a rolling.
The food has been delicious.
Eaten a lot, slept a lot, and helmed a lot.
Very wavy conditions last night.
Gusted up to 40 knots.
In a squall in the middle of the night.
Full moon and stars.
I've never been so afraid of drinking water.
Not being sick, being sick.
More sick than expected. Threw up in the wrong direction and got sick on my forehead.
Challenges of trying to cook noodles at a 45-degree angle. So trying to use the loo at a 45-degree angle. I think I've seen a turtle.
I managed to cook some lunch in my underwear.
And singing Fleetwood Mac at the top of our lungs.
I really enjoy everyone here, and their company makes me kind of a release about that seasickness.
It's been wonderful.
and we're almost heading in the right direction for the gyre.
So I did find my sea legs and I managed to wipe the sick from my forehead and very much settled into life on board, which was very different from life at home, or let's say normal life at home. There's actually quite a lot of comparisons between being out on the boat in the middle of the ocean and being in isolation and lockdown, as we all are currently around the world. What the most beautiful thing about being out in these remote landscapes, though, is the fact that you're totally cut off from everyday distractions. There's no WhatsApp or Instagram. There's no TikTok to scroll through and look at and get addicted to. You are there focused on the people around you, learning from each other, doing lots of science that Win is going to tell you all about in a moment, but also really thinking about what the ocean means to you. You can see the picture behind me. You see lots of amazing wildlife that really helps you to connect and appreciate the beauty of our planet. Yet we know that these dolphins are playing in oceans that are littered with bits of plastic. There's lots of time to think on board. We run a programme of education and discussion. Every day we're trawling for samples and learning new things about our environment and the ocean that we're sailing through. And it allows us to come up with different solutions and ideas about the actions that we can all take when we get back to land. And this is coupled with the fact that we all have our own unique skills, or superpowers, if you like, that you can match some of the actions that would be most appropriate for your personality and everyone on board, as well as their local communities, so they can make the biggest difference when they get back home and take action. So it's about everyone finding their role in the plastic pollution crisis. And that's coupled with obviously sailing and living life on board a boat and carrying out our science. And I'm now going to hand over to Winnie, who is going to take you through some more details of our scientific data collection.
There we go. Joe and I both operating the controls there. So yeah, on board, we're carrying out scientific research to investigate plastic pollution. And our main aims are to look at the types, the distribution of plastics, how many are out there, and also where ultimately to work out where they're coming from and how we might best solve that with evidence-based solutions. So we know that most of the plastics originate on land, so that's where we start. We conduct scientific surveys on land to monitor the litter on the street. We do beach cleans, and we also visit waste management facilities to understand the challenges that different communities, different countries face. As Sally showed in Bali, they haven't got much of a waste management system, and this picture is from the Galapagos. Again, it's a small island and they deal with plastic pollution very differently. Here we've got a picture that I took when we were visiting the Azores. This is a small island in the Northeast Atlantic, and they ship 14 tons of plastic bottles, just plastic bottles, to the mainland each month because they don't have the infrastructure on their island to be able to cope with that. But the main part of our work is when we're out at sea. And we do lots of different scientific sampling, but I'm just going to show you a short clip here of one of the main types that we do.
Right now we've got the manta trawl in the water, and so this is taking a surface water sample. We're really trying to understand what plastic is floating on the surface, and also how did it get there, where's it come from. So once we take that sample, we will have a look at it on the deck to take out the pieces of plastic. We'll go down below and then we'll run it through the FGIR to find out what sort of polymers we've actually got in these samples. But it is challenging to do on a sailboat. We have used the spinnaker pole here to rig the manta trawl on the side of the boat, so it's always cutting into fresh ocean that hasn't been disturbed by Travel Edge's hull. We then have to adjust a lot of lines to get it to float perfectly on the surface. We don't want it diving and we don't want it skipping because we need to be able to get a really clean sample. So it stays in the water for 30 minutes and it's really just taking a sample this wide, and it's amazing how many pieces of plastic that we find every single time, especially when you look out here. And I mean, look at it right now, it's completely perfect and blue, and you just think there cannot possibly be a piece of plastic in the ocean today, and it comes up full of fragments every time.
And what we're really looking for in that type of sampling is microplastics, small fragments of plastics, usually coming from the breakdown, the fragmentation of larger plastic items. But they can also be manufactured to be really small. So a lot of the clothes that we wear are made of synthetic fibres that release fibres. And also things like microbeads that are in facial scrubs can also release little plastics. So here's some in the samples there. We get some recognisable things come up, that plastic spoon. So we're about 1,000 miles offshore here. I haven't seen land in about a week, in the middle of the North Atlantic Gyre. And this is what we find in our trawls. And you can see we get a different range of sizes. And the microplastics here, if you look on the left image, are littered amongst animals. This is biological life. And you can just see how, well, A, they look so similar, but B, they're the same size, which makes it a real challenge when we're out in the ocean to actually try and clean up this plastics. We do find larger things, this shoe, a plastic barrel, a styrofoam cup, and a styrofoam float are just some of the things that we saw when we were sailing in the Pacific Ocean a few months ago. But really, it's the microplastics, the small things that really dominate the oceans, almost like confetti, a soup of this plastics. You may have heard of the gyres. These are accumulation zones, often described as floating islands of plastics. Here you can see where they are, indicated by the arrows. We're actually sailing through 4 of these gyres, accumulation zones where plastics and other materials aggregate. But yeah, as I said, they're often called these floating islands, but in reality, they're not actually that simple. It's the microplastics that really dominate these areas. And again, show you another short video. Ooh, technical issues here with my mouse, sorry. We're here in the middle of the South Pacific Gyre, currently trawling for microplastics. Gyres are accumulation zones of plastics, but they're not quite floating islands you might think. It's microplastics, small little fragments of plastic that pollute these areas. And we're trying to understand how many there are, what types of polymers, types of plastics we're finding in these locations. In some ways, if it were these islands, it would be easier to clean them up, but this just poses so many challenges in how we deal with this plastic pollution problem. But not all of the plastics remain at the surface of our oceans, but they can sink down through the water column and down to the seafloor. So we use another method to look at this distribution.
Microplastics, but the lithium bottle really gets a representative sample of what's going on further down in the water column. What we do is drop the lithium bottle off the boat, and once it reaches a depth of 25 meters, we send down a messenger which clips shut the bottle at that depth. Then we pull it in and send it down into the hole for sampling. So what happens is the water is pumped out through a very small filter. That filter is then sent off in a petri dish for sampling. We do that 3 times to get a really representative sample of what might be in this area at that time.
And the science is something that everyone gets involved with on board. All of the guest crew, all of these amazing women that come on board pitch in and get first-hand experience of all the different scientific techniques.
So that leads us to our 80 women that have been on eXXpedition around the world so far. And you can see them all here smiling in their various crew shots. But as Winnie just said, all of those women get to experience the scientific research. They get to collect the data, they get to contribute to this kind of cutting edge new knowledge that we're trying to find out more about, not just that plastic's out in our oceans, but you know where that plastic comes from and what we can do back on land to make a difference. And it's these women, this community of change makers, that really makes a difference. Every single woman has their own personality, their own skill or superpower. And, you know, a bit like Winnie's superpower is very obviously her scientific brain. All of these women have their own kind of experience and expertise. And it's that allows us to really broaden our reach as those women go back to their own communities and talk and educate about this issue, so that we can affect change in whatever sphere of influence they all have. And that's it from us, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Start some questions off.
All right, excellent. Well, Sally and Winnie, thank you so much for taking us on a little virtual version of the expedition. It looks like it's been an amazing time so far. Lots of important research about what's happening in our oceans, and obviously we certainly hope it can resume sooner rather than later. All right, well, we've got a great group of classrooms, or sorry, I say classrooms. We do have some classrooms joining us, but they're not in their classrooms, they're at home. We have lots of families joining us from both sides of the ocean, from North America, as well as lots of groups joining us in the EU and the UK as well. So I'm gonna give a few quick shout outs that came in from the chat so far. We've got Mr. Murray's class joining us. We've got, they're in Aurelia. We've got people joining us from Maryland in the US, in Baltimore, Hampshire in the UK, Barcelona, let's see, Sunnyvale, California, Frederick, Maryland. So lots of great groups joining us online. Keep introducing yourselves, and I'll make sure to do a few more shout outs as we get to some of the questions, but let's get to some of those questions. So we have some groups who are joining us live on camera today, and we're going to go to Amy and June, who are joining us in Ottawa today, here in Canada. How are we doing, Amy and June?
Good, thank you.
All right, do you guys have a question for our speakers today?
We're wondering what kids can learn outside of school to prepare themselves to do scientific expeditions. So like other skills that might come in handy.
Yeah, so as a geography teacher, I'll jump in on that one. I think the more you can do in observing your surroundings, the more skills you'll pick up that help you understand how the world works. One thing you can do that's linked to plastic pollution, there's lots of kind of online apps and groups and things. So if you were going to the beach, or even if you were just walking down your street, you can do a survey and record what types of litter you are finding as you're going, and that might help you develop some skills in kind of data collection, all of which I'm sure you'll do in school anyway, both through your geography and your science curriculum. But that's something that you can definitely do. And I think one of the most important things is having a curious mind and asking questions, because that will really help you understand how things work. And when you're asking about them, you observe more things as well.
All right, great question to get us started. Before I grab one from YouTube, I want to give a shout out. Mrs. Woodland's class is joining us. A few of the students are joining us on camera from Belleville, Ontario. So if you do have a question, our students in Belleville, if you click the participants button at the bottom, it's got the little 16 next to it. And then on the right, you can choose to raise your hand, and I'll see a little blue hand next to your name. And that's how I'll know to pick you to make sure that we work one of your questions in. We've got Gabrielle joining us on YouTube, and she's wondering if you have sampled anywhere yet where you didn't find microplastics on the journey so far.
We found a few locations where we haven't found many. Some of the legs in the Caribbean that Sally led didn't find many, but then conversely, other parts of the Caribbean where we actually found our greatest number of samples. We found over 300 bits of microplastic in one single trawl. So in 30 minutes, more than 300. Which is just a staggering amount. But unfortunately, we pretty much find it in most places that we look.
All right. I'm going to jump now to Amy and Isabella. They're joining us in Indiana. Let me get that microphone turned on. All right, we're ready for you.
I've wanted to be a marine biologist for a while. How do you become one of the, is there any way for kids to go on missions that you've done and kind of be a part of it?
Amazing. I studied marine biology before I got into plastic pollution as a speciality. So unfortunately, eXXpedition has an age limit on it, so you have to be a little bit older before you can come on one of our trips, but that definitely doesn't stop you getting involved in doing so many things that will help towards becoming a marine biologist. So I was always out every evening after school in the garden or down on the weekends looking on the beach. I'm a huge fan of rock pools, tide pools, and always looking at what's inside there and just so interested in the marine life. And that's really what got me into plastic pollution as well, because I care about the animals and the organisms in our ocean and want to protect them. And plastic pollution is such a huge problem. So yeah, I mean, a lot of what Sally said initially, being curious and trying to take a really active and observing your environment around you will be really good. Stay on studying maths and science at school, and as you get older, yeah, and go for it, and just try and, as you get a little bit older, try and do some volunteering on the side with different organizations in your area, or beach cleanups. All of that type of thing will help you connect with other people in your local area that have already pursued that career, and will usually always offer helpful insights into the next generation.
Cool, thank you.
Good luck. Great advice. Allison is joining us. Allison, I believe, is one of our students from the Belleville class joining us. Allison, do you want to unmute for us? All right, Allison, we got you.
I was wondering, out of all the plastic in the ocean, how much, what percentage do you think you've cleaned out?
So the main purpose of eXXpedition isn't to go out and just clean it up. As Winnie was saying, those tiny microplastics are the same size as a lot of the living organisms, particularly on the surface of our ocean. And so you'd actually potentially be causing a bit of environmental damage if you were to go and just kind of hoover up absolutely everything. And we haven't quite got to the point where we've made the technology to be able to do that. We're really about carrying out the scientific research that will allow us to look back at where that plastic comes from in the first place. There's this saying that if your bathroom was leaking and you got home and you kind of went into the bathroom, what would you do first? Would you turn off the tap, or would you start mopping up? And it's very important to mop up. I know that I was always being told as a kid that I should tidy up after myself. So I think that has a huge value. But at the same time, you'd be mopping up forever if you didn't turn the tap off. And so therefore, we're really trying to do solutions focused science so that we can look at the actions and the behaviors that all of us can do and achieve to try and stop that flow of plastic going out into our oceans so that we don't cause any more damage to our beautiful oceans.
All right. Let's see here. So a couple science questions coming in via YouTube. And the first one is from the young animator, and they're curious about, from the samples you collect, do you ever see microbes interacting with the microplastic?
So we've actually got some partners. We partner with lots of other scientists. I gave you a really snapshot of the different types of scientific research that we're doing, but we have a partner scientist here in the UK that's actually looking at the different bacteria and viruses on the surface of the plastics to understand what colonizes them and things like that. So that's still work in progress. Unfortunately, the current situation where everyone's not allowed in the labs is slowing us down slightly, but we'll have some interesting results, I'm sure, coming out quite soon on that one.
All right, so a follow-up science question. This is from Matthew, and Matthew's wondering, when you're sampling for or taking those water samples for the plastics, do you ever look for other contaminants like mercury?
Yeah, no, as the simple answer. It's a good point. Yet there's loads of heavy metals and other organic pollutants in the water. So actually plastics can absorb organic pollutants from the oceans and concentrate them in their surface. So then when animals eat them, there's the potential for those pollutants to come out of the plastics and into the body of the animals, or even us. You know, we're eating fish, we're eating other animals, where we could get that plastic coming into our bodies as well. So we are looking at mercury in hair, in the women's hair on board. Some are donating small samples, which again is sent off to another partner scientist in the US to look at how much mercury is in our hair. But currently, we're not looking at the pollutants actually in the plastics. Oh no, I tell a fib there. We are. Oh dear, sorry. We are working with a partner who's also looking at the pollutants inside the plastics. So we're looking at pollutants in plastics and pollutants in our hair samples.
All right. I want to give a shout out. I'm going to turn on Mrs. Love's microphone in a moment. She's joining us from Scotland. And some of her students may be tuning into the event as well today. So I'm just going to pop the mic on. How are we doing today, Jennifer?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. I thought I'd check in and see if you had any questions for us, or maybe your students might have sent something in.
My students we've been learning about gyres. So we would quite like to know what the biggest gyre that you've actually seen, what are they like to see in real life, they were asking, because we've watched a lot of clips of them, but we can't even imagine what it must be like to look at in real life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hi, Jenny.
Hi.
I think we know each other.
We do, yes.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in.
You've spoken to my class before.
Yeah, I have. Lovely to see you again virtually. Yeah, so the clip that I showed there, I've actually sailed through two of the gyres so far, the North Atlantic and the South Pacific, and Sally's been through the North Pacific. So the North Pacific is actually meant to accumulate the most plastics, but also we've been out sampling that the longest, as it borders with North America. The capabilities of getting out there and collecting those samples are advanced compared to some of the others. But they really are just these beautiful blue oceans. There really aren't these floating islands that you hear about, which makes it a really hard thing to try and communicate to people, because they think you'll see this mountain of litter. And don't get me wrong, you do see larger items every now and then, but it's really the microplastics, the small bits that you don't see until you put that net in the water. From my experience, I don't know, Sally, if you've got something to add there from the North Pacific.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's actually the same. We did see kind of a big, and you saw it in that first video, kind of mess of lots of fishing nets, and it was shoved with bottles, and it was a bit like an iceberg from the point of view. There was about 10% that we could see, and about 90% of like just massive rubbish was underneath the water. But that's very, very small compared to the vastness of the ocean and the vastness of the gyre. You can see identical items, as what you said. I'm pretty sure we saw half a toilet seat and a chair and all sorts of things that really don't belong out in the ocean. But it's those tiny bits of microplastics that just are shocking in the amount that there are, because when you look over the side of the boat, you don't necessarily see that that's what you're looking at. And as I said before, you've got beautiful kind of wildlife living in that environment, and it's quite shocking to, you know, see both side by side in such a remote part of our planet.
All right, so I just took a quick check into the Slido room, and I can see some students have been in there putting some questions in for us. So I'm going to grab two questions from there right now. The first one is, actually a few students have been curious about some of the marine life that you or other expedition members have seen so far on the journey. And the second question is about the amount of plastics collected so far. So how much do you think you've collected in your samples so far?
Sally, answer the marine life question while I do some maths.
Okay, I've got some maths for you on my phone if you want, Winnie. So the wildlife that we've seen when we were crossing the November, December, we saw loads and loads of different pods of dolphins. Particular voyage, leg 4, had dolphins visiting us every single day, which is just phenomenal, really. And then we also have can you still hear me? No? Hello?
We lost you for a second there, Sally. You were telling us about the dolphins, seeing the dolphins.
Yeah, so yeah, in the Caribbean, we saw dolphins pretty much every other day, which was pretty amazing, particularly on some voyage legs more than others, but on average it was probably pretty much every other day, which is just amazing. We also stopped off quite a lot in the coastal waters in various different Caribbean island nations, partly to do outreach and to do that onshore kind of scientific research that Winnie spoke about, but we also did some underwater cleanups, particularly in Bonaire, which is part of the Dutch Caribbean island group. And plastic pollution is one of those things. You kind of go to a beach and you think it's all clean, and then when you start looking to clean up, you kind of start seeing more and more, and you can't stop seeing it. And that was exactly the same when we did this kind of snorkel cleanup. We were amongst this amazing reef ecosystem. Yeah, we picked up a huge amount of waste whilst we were doing it. So in the coastal waters, obviously, you've got a lot more diverse wildlife. Out in the Caribbean, a lot of dolphins in terms of kind of more megafauna style. And I know when we were crossing the North Pacific Gyre, we saw lots of whales as well, and albatross. And you're kind of wanting to shoo away the albatross who are taking refuge on the boat for a moment, knowing that they were, you know, feeding on, unfortunately, quite a lot of plastic at times, and then taking that back to their chicks back on land. So yeah, but loads of different fauna, and you know, particularly in the coastal waters where you've got a lot more biodiversity. Winnie?
So far, I think we've done close to 100 manta trawls looking at the microplastics in the surface. We've collected sediments that I didn't talk about in the presentation just because of time. We've collected sediment samples from 7 different countries to look at what plastic's settling down and reaching the seafloor. And we've also done a bunch of Niskin bottles to look at microplastics through the water column. I reckon about 80 different samples of that. So we're really building up this 3-dimensional picture. We're also working with partner scientists in the UK to look at microplastics in air and what might fall out in the air. So we've got this full spectrum from the air to the surface of the water column and seabed of trying to categorize the different types of plastics.
We've also done 24 of our circularity assessment protocols as well in all the different countries that we've been to so far, which gives us an idea of what the waste leakage is like on land that Winnie spoke about earlier, and how that waste is actually managed.
Okay, sounds very comprehensive. Let's jump back to Isabella, our future marine biologist in Indiana. I think they have another question.
Don't get me wrong, I love that it's all women, but is there a reason you don't allow men on board?
No, so do you want to take this, Winnie, or?
No, you go for it.
So it's when the idea of eXXpedition came about. Emily Penn and Lucy Gilliam, who are co-founders, it was a time that, you know, there was a lot of discussion around the impact of plastic pollution on women's health. What plastic does, as Winnie mentioned earlier, is it absorbs lots of toxic chemicals onto its surface. And those toxic chemicals are known as endocrine disruptor. So therefore, they can mimic our hormones. Now, both men and women have hormones, and we're not saying this is an issue that doesn't affect men at all. But what it does for women is, obviously, hormones are very, very important, particularly during pregnancy. So at the time, there was a lot of discussion around this particular kind of area of research. And so both Emily and Lucy thought, well, why not tackle this issue that's, you know, could have this huge impact on female health with a group of awesome women. And that's coupled with the fact that women are underrepresented in STEM subjects. So it gives a platform for women to really be celebrated in science and feel safe and kind of, you know, have the kind of the platform to do so. But also the same in adventure sailing. We're not talking about kind of easy expeditions here. Actually, sailing offshore can be really physically and mentally challenging, and you know, it provides an opportunity. It's traditionally always been a very male-dominated area, and it still is, and so it's great to have kind of a boat of all women going out and kind of, you know, celebrating female power, I suppose, and female empowerment.
Love that.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
All right, very cool. We're going to grab one more question from YouTube, and I think this is a great final question. Liz is wondering, in your journeys around the world sailing, can you tell us about something hopeful that maybe you've seen in your journeys?
For me, we do outreach and presentation. Oh, sorry, a lot of feedback there. I'll start that again. For me, we do a lot of outreach and presentations in all the different countries that we go to. And we always get an amazing attendance, especially by children. And we do lots of school events. And I think that's a really hopeful aspect, just like here, having all of these people tune in, and the next generation of scientists, of lawmakers, of educators, you name it, they're here, and they really give hope. I think the awareness around the issue is so much greater now, and the pressure for change that we see in the younger generation is constantly really inspiring, and that's in so many of the communities that we go to. So that would be mine.
Yeah, I've spoken a bit about the kind of women on board and them all kind of feeling really empowered and educated to go back and make a change. And I think that coupled with the community events, and I think we've done about 34 community outreach events already, even though we've only had kind of 8 voyage legs. It really shows the power of when you get a group of passionate people together, kind of those wanting to make a difference. And I think that's something that really takes home. And we often, I heard somebody say that when they stepped off the boat, that they'd had this amazing epic journey crossing an ocean, yet actually the journey was just really beginning. And that's, you know, they've got this amazing experience and they can take that forward. And the more we can spread that through kind of outreach events, obviously education is something that's very close to my heart. So I really believe that, you know, students and adults as well, you know, if they understand more about how our world works, they're going to feel more propelled to want to make a difference. So.
All right, perfect. Well, I want to start off with a huge shout out to the groups that tuned in via YouTube today. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for continuing the learning and sending in all those awesome questions. Huge shout out to the groups who joined us on camera today. Thanks for joining us and thanks for your questions. And then, of course, Sally and Winnie, thank you so much for sharing some of the story with us. It's an awesome expedition, and we're excited to hopefully grab the two of you again and maybe some of the other women who have been on the expedition so far for some more events while we're all at home. We can do some more learning together.
Yeah, well, hopefully in not too distant the future, you'll be able to zoom directly into the boat.
Thanks everyone so much. Amazing questions.
All right, well, thanks again everyone for joining in today. Let's just turn on those mics and give the people joining us live a chance just to say a goodbye and thank you. So the mics are on if you want to say goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Well, once again, everybody, thanks so much for joining in. Tune in later today on Exploring by Seat of Your Pants at 11 o'clock. We're going to the Toronto Zoo for a tour of the African Rainforest Pavilion. So it should be pretty cool. We hope to see some of your groups joining us there as well. For now, we're going to sign off. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today.